Sorry, there's some technology glitches today, but thank you for making time to tune in and listen to this morning's episode. I must apologize because I've just got a terrible cold and I've got hay fever. So now and then I may cough, but that's part of who I am. Show up in myself and not just pretend that everything's is going well. There are days where we have illnesses. There are days that we have joy. There are days that we have challenges in our lives. And it's all part of who and what makes us who we are. So welcome, and I'm so glad to be here, and I'm so glad to have you in this show. So last week I talked about traditional healing and the different methods, and made references to the Aboriginal community from Australia, the Indigenous people. And I also would like to acknowledge that the show today is based on that, but just a little, because I thought I would just expand it a little more so you have a little bit more understanding. For those of us who have worked with our Indigenous community, and for those of us who have worked in our diverse communities, because Australia is very diverse. Maybe just like any other countries, in Canada, in the USA, in UK, we have diverse groups of people. And within the diversity, we bring a lot of our traditional wisdom when we migrate to live in other parts of the world. And those traditional wisdom also existed thousands of years here in Australia. And I just wanted to expand a little bit about the traditional healing. Because last week I talked about, massage therapies, the smoking ceremonies from the Indigenous Aboriginal Australians, the narratives that they bring forward to help us to heal in relation to our self-care. So I just wanted to go back to some of my experiences when I first started working in Aboriginal communities in some parts of Australia. So I like I said way back, I moved my family to New Zealand, and we lived there for 7 years. And within that 7 years, there's all these financial, upheavals and financial crisis in 2007. So during that time, my family and I, it was really a challenging time for us, but we survived all those things, and we survived because we wanted to, and just like any other people, we build resilience over time because we, as humans, no matter how or what crisis you go through, you still want to survive and want to move forward and want to thrive and want to go back to some of those traditional, those natural wisdoms that was already in place in our system. So in 2007, I just wanted to share you my story. In 2007 in New Zealand, I just walked across my house and had a look at the paper. I was praying to get a job because I was out of job and I was doing casual work. And as I walked towards one of the delis, picked up a newspaper, and as I flipped it, I saw these big advertisements. And this advertisement is from the Western Australian government, and they're seeking people who are passionate or who are willing and wanting an experience and adventure to work in Western Australia. And so I didn't think, I just picked up the paper, went back to work. I was doing some casual property management with some Ray White real estate in New Zealand. So I decided to just get my application done, and within a week I had a response, and I was just shocked. I was thinking, oh wow, what an opportunity. And I know that opportunities, sometimes when it present themselves, we're just sitting in our comfort zones thinking, oh yeah, the world will go by and I will still be here and I'm happy to be here. Yet that opportunity came for me and I grabbed it and I applied for it. Within a week, I got a response from the Western Australian government, and just informing me that they would like to get some of my educational experiences and stuff so that I can move on to another level where they would be able to screen me for work and also assess my qualification, which they did. And within 2 months, I had to go into a panel of 8 people, and 2 of the staff members from the child protection. And there's a different, like the natural child protection system with working with non-governmental organization, and also the statutory departments and government departments where there is a system in place, not only just to help families and young people and children to feel safe, but also work in collaboration so that children are always feel safe in their homes. And so there were 2 elders, Aboriginal elders from Western Australia. And so they were questioning me and I was responding to them. And one of the question, and this is one of the second final question, and they said to me, for example, I told them that I've never worked in a child protection background, yet I have worked with a lot of diverse communities, and I've worked with women and children. I've worked with families as well in my prior career, yet I have never gone into a child protection system where everything has a system. There's always a system in place. And so one of the question is around if you're going into the remote communities and you're driving a 4-wheel drive, right? And then as soon as you reach the communities, there is a serious or a severe case of a child sexual abuse. And as you drive into the community, you realize that it was raining. Secondly, you get stuck there, right? The priority is that you need to remove the child immediately within 24 hours or within 48 hours or within 24 hours to get this child into a safe place. So let's say you are there right in the middle in the afternoon, got stuck there, it's raining heavily, you cannot drive back to another suburb or where you know, like we have offices, child protection offices in one place, so you cannot return overnight. And explain to us, how would you keep a child safe? So here I am, sitting there, nervous. I felt that I said, oh, okay. I was thinking, if I don't know anything, I would ask that question back. But then I said, look, let me just explain, what would I do if I am stuck there? So I know very well that I've never worked in child protection. And I also understand, having some background into child protection in Western Australia, that helped me to get some of my responses to the question. And I know maybe it's not correct or it's correct, but it's okay. So this is what I said. If I drove into the community, a very new community, I've never been there, I've been instructed to do this, this. Then I realized that I got stuck there. And I've always remembered that in working with, especially with client and relationship, we're always working in pairs. And my understanding is that there has to be a senior officer with me. So I'm not just traveling alone, but in this case scenario, this is how they throw questions at you, because I'm new. So I said, okay, that's fine. If I'm going into the community, it's a new community, I have a little bit of understanding of what and how the community is, geographical location, where are the police stations are located, where all the medical is located. It's a very, very small community. Right. My car is stuck. So I'm assuming I'm with someone else. So if we are stuck there and this priority, this is all about keeping children safe. If it's a high-risk case of sexual abuse or severe case of family abuse, and the instruction is that we need to remove the child, because that takes a lot of some of the paperwork that needed to be done to enable some of the processes to flow or to go in. So you may think that the plan is already there, but you always have a backup plan. So you have plan A to go into the community. This is going to run smoothly. Or plan B, when you get stuck, the weather's terrible, you can't drive back. What is your immediate thinking and what needs to happen? So I said to the panel, I said, look, when we are there, we need to look at who is receiving us. We also need to look at the background information of families, if there are any, and there's no person that's been identified as safety. Perhaps there is one of them, a younger child, maybe 13 or 15 years old. Sometimes mothers do get so caught up, or a parent, I should say. A parent can be in extended families, in Aboriginal communities or in diverse communities, can be anyone, an uncle, an aunt. And if this abused child is to be left there, you need to remove the child. So I said to the panel, I said, in that case, there is no way out. We could remove this child immediately and go back to our office, because it takes like 6 or 7 hours drive to head back to base. So we are stuck there. So what we needed to do in this case is there has to be someone in the community, within that household, if you could identify someone who is a protective person, anyone, and if you could make negotiations there to remove the person who's doing or the perpetrator, I should say, out of that, then the child can remain safe in that community. So I know there are lots of times where we say we may be wrong in our decision making, but when it comes to child protection, your antenna and everything is always on alert, because not only were you trained to think and feel like that, but when you start to enjoy what you do, and when you come from a place of trusting yourself, and not just trusting yourself, but trusting others that you work with, it should be okay. So after that, I was, doubting myself that I wouldn't get through. But after 1 week, when they left, I had this email, and it has really opened my eyes to go out and see what Australia is like all the time. And so I moved my family from New Zealand to Western Australia, and I lived there in some of the suburbs, like a town in Geraldton, but I also wanted to, like, there's something that's calling, go into the remote community view. And when I had the opportunity after 9 months, I was promoted to go and do work in the remote communities. It has really opened my heart and my eyes for some of the things that are happening in remote communities. And I can also say that in remote communities, yes, you look at the landscape, the geographical makeup of Western Australia, it's a totally new area. It is so different from, from Brisbane or from Melbourne or from Sydney. The landscape, the land itself is a kaleidoscope of colors, and also the soil. And in the soil, there's all these healing waters, that are there. There's these oral stories, and the narratives are already there. There is the history, and it is a phenomena if you talk about, some parts of it, but it was such a beautiful place to work. And unless you love what you do, then you can find your space and, enjoy all these things. But I'm also talking about healing. So healing, when we have a system already in place, we have a bureaucratic system already in place. The difficulties and the challenges is are looking at, things that we learn and things that I've learned, especially therapies, from a mainstream, education system and mainstream, I should say, learning development. It talks about all these things, cognitive therapy. It talks about the human-centered approach. It talks about the, narrative, and which is similar to the narrative and the oral or storytelling of Aboriginal communities. So you have this understanding from a theoretical perspective, but you also need to have some understanding, not just from your own experience, but learning as well from the natural system. So what I mean from the natural system is from the Indigenous traditional communities and ways of keeping their children safe. So I lived in a small town in Mikathara, but I have to travel 2.5 hours to a place in Wooluna and in that office, there's only 3 of us. So Mikathara is about 700 to 800, very small community. But if you travel to another place called Wiluna, there's only about 150 at that time, and this was 2008. And so we have all our practice, and this is what we get used to. Child protection system where we have all our safety measures in place. We have our policies and procedures. We have our practice, safe practice manuals and, protocols and all that. Yet when you go and work in communities, some of those approaches and theoretical stuff, some of it does not work in some of these remote communities. First, because remote communities, it's a natural community, yet there's lots of contemporary issues, I should say, like drugs and alcohol, family domestic violence, lack of resources. Not a lot of people want to go and work in the remote communities. A lot of our staff get burned. We talk about self-care, yet after 2 years, this bureaucratic system has put us in such a way that we can't keep up with admin work. All these things that we need to do in order to not just keep children safe, but order to have a system that you just get used to working. You have to do your admin. So a lot of times I feel that when I moved into the remote communities, I know that I have to do my work, but finding balance within that work is so difficult. Yet, although it's challenging, like I said, we have to think outside of, well, I will repeat it again, think outside of the boxes. We're always thinking of innovative ways, of new ways of doing it. And so I was there for 6 months, and within that 6 months, I have seen a lot of good work that have been done by our past child protection workers, our police officers, our medical field, our Indigenous elders, I must say, have really, some of the women, the elders, have stepped up, and some of the men as well have stepped up to keep their children safe. And we have an educational system, a mainstream educational system. They have put breakfast for children. They have set up women, mothers, and young women going in to help in the school. But we also have set up an alternative place in the Family Violence Center, Domestic Violence Center, for breakfast as well, for those children who, who wake up and, it's always constant thing for mothers and grandmothers and uncles and older siblings to say, get dressed and go to school. So if they don't go to school that day, we have set up in the system in remote communities alternative places where it's like a drop-in place. People can just, children, mothers can go there to learn, and not just learning to read and write, but, art, music, talk about sports, talk about their stories, and also some of the programs that in the statutory work cannot fit into the natural way of healing. We worked in collaboration with the community to move the kids or identify some of the elders' homes where, if your parent or if your uncle and aunt and you live in extended families, that they cannot look after you in a safe place and you feel that you're not in a safe place, you can always go to an elder's home. There's food available there. So we made sure that some of the things that we can not do on mainstream, we have to find an alternative way to get children to feel safe and thrive. And so we have we use these natural healing places. Take the children to some of the water holes. Take the children to some of these rivers or some of the streams. They do natural fishing. They swim. Elders tell stories. And so it's not something that you think you can't do. It's always there. And instead of, forcing a child to go to school and be there, the learning is done in the bushes. They have a system of how they teach their children, their wisdom, their skills. If a child wants to pursue sports in that small remote community, with the collective efforts of community-based development with overseas funding, there's a theater place and a huge community place there where people from overseas, experts, artists and actors and musicians come from the US, into that small remote community to identify talents of young Indigenous people. And therefore, so the healing waters, if a child is getting just almost in the, I should say, almost on the verge of having child protection or intervention to come in and remove the child, there's all these alternative ways that is put in place, an acknowledgement to Aboriginal people and elders who have put not just there, but develop a system of healing, because they said sometimes, a lot of times, children get out of their normal, or I should say, like last week I said about the spirituality. When they lose their spirituality, you need to bring these children back into the holistic way of doing things, and that means getting them to reconnect themselves back into their spirituality. And spirituality, in the sense, is that connecting them back into the ground, into the earth, into ways of doing things from an Aboriginal framework or Indigenous perspective. And so my healing topic is all around not just massages and everything, but utilizing some of those healing perspectives to help children thrive. And I know that one system is not perfect. Some, child protection system has, recourse or has caused a lot of trauma and fear and mistrust. But if you can find your own space within, this social work practice, you will have respect of the elders. You will also have not just respect from other people, but you will have respect for yourself as an individual, learning and growing and understanding what life is all about. So life is not all about just the systems that we all grew up. Life is all about this universe, this world full of beauty, of natural healing. And so I wanted to just expand a little bit of what I've talked about last week. And I wanted to have just to get us to have some understanding, but also I wanted to share you some parts of my experience as a worker working in a child protection system. And so within the whole system in 2009, I should say, there has been a lot of reform in the sense that this government bureaucratic system is slowly breaking down to help adjust the way we do work with our Aboriginal communities. And I know there's lots and lots of work that needs to be done, but this healing process is always there. All we needed to do is think outside and work with our elders. And no community is perfect, but within that, some of the communities like Mikathara, Willuna, there is another place where they call it dry communities. And I know a lot of my Australian friends who are child protection workers or who work social workers will understand what are dry communities. Communities where alcohol and drugs is not allowed. So Mikathara to Karalandi, there's another place, and it's called an oasis in the desert. You have all this massive dry land, and as you drive towards Karalandi, it's only, say, about half an hour. I may be wrong, but as soon as you drive out and you see all these colors of the soil, And then as soon as you reach this little place called Karalandi, it's an oasis. It's got lots of water. And some parts of all over Australia, some parts of Western Australia, as one of the elder that I work with, Madeline Wali, said to us, underneath the soil, there's all these table form kind of tables underneath the dry land. That's how you say there's specific places where you can find water. And another thing I learned is to always listen. Don't think that we are smart or we come with experience. You always adhere to protocols when it comes to working in an Indigenous community, because those protocols help you to keep yourself safe. And there are sacred places underneath. In some of the desert form place, it's called tablelands. And those system has kept water for many, many, many years. And that was, the education that I got from some of our Aboriginal elders that I've worked with in the past. And they have said there's specific trees that if you are alone and you are thirsty and you're dehydrated and you have no water, there are specific leaves that you can chew on so that you can feel better or you can have some hydration. And those are the wisdom that I learned working in a remote communities, some of the healing practices that have continued. If a place is, I should say, residential area where children are restless, they would do all these smoking ceremonies. And it's ongoing. There is all these healing things that are ongoing. So I have within my short story, there are three things that my three takes for today, and it just helped me to build some of my ideas when I started to do my podcast, and it has helped me and grounded me to start my podcast because I'm always scared. I'm someone who doesn't want to, talk about myself and my life, but I thought this is an opportune time for me because my show will help me to go further than just doing my show on my own. So there's three takes for today, and one of them is that there's this quote from Dr. Eileen Monroe. She's one of the she's a doctor from the UK, and she talked about child protection in length with her expertise and her experiences. And she said, always think that we may be wrong. So we don't have all the answers. We think we are right a lot of times, but sometimes we have to believe that we may be wrong. Another take for me is respecting space. And when I say respecting space in the sense of understanding that in some of the communities, when we work with diverse communities or Indigenous communities, in the Aboriginal communities, men's business is different from women's business. And I won't go into more detail, but if it's men's business, it's men's business. If it's women's business, it's women's business. But when it comes to keeping children safe, just like African communities and all other indigenous community in the world, it takes a whole community to raise one child. My third thing is deep listening. A lot of times when discussions happen in the past, I'm always like, whew, I want to jump in. I want to say my piece because I know the subject, right? Yet I learned for many, many years to understand what listening means. And listening, anyone can elaborate on listening. Yeah, I'm talking about deep listening, because deep listening is not just about listening with your ears. Deep listening goes beyond just listening. Deep listening is not just understanding what the story or listening to what someone else is telling you, but feeling it, processing it, and also clarifying it with others. If what you are listening, what it entails. So deep listening is not just silence. Your senses are alive, yet you have this moment where you could feel it. And when you have this deep listening, you can sense it that is different from just listening. So that's my 3 take for today. And understand that a lot of us would say, oh, what is she going on about? But I love working. I love social work, and who doesn't love? And I wanted to come in and just share some of my experiences that has helped me with my behaviors, with my attitude in how traditional healing and the healing process from our natural system can be combined into the mainstream education and learning to move people from getting stuck. Not saying all these what ifs, this blah, 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 but moving forward within our lives, not just helping our families to grow, but also helping others to change lives one show at a time. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next Tuesday.